All right, so this is AP Lit, and we're finishing up our PowerPoint on the book House of Seven Gables. And so the Mall family is the other family, and so Matthew Mall curses the family, curses the land and the family. He has a son, Thomas Mall, and ironically, I'm not sure I can explain why, although he is the son of Matthew Mall, who was unjustly accused of being a witch by Colonel Pynchon. Thomas Mall actually builds the House of Seven Gables. He's an architect and a builder. So he actually builds the house for Colonel Pynchon. He, of course, gets paid for it and all that, but still, I think that's odd. It's really his land. It ought to be his land, and yet he's now building this house. He has a son who, in this really interesting chapter, is involved with hypnotism of one of the characters. So then finally you have Holgraves, who is living at the end. So all these people are passed away when the story begins, but they're part of the story. Holgrave is a distant relative that is actually in the story. So the book is still about these two families, the Pynchons and the Malls. The first chapter goes back into this, so you'll get a review of that when you read it, this story of the cursing. That sounds, even that sounds supernatural. The idea of cursing, you could curse somebody and it would come true, is an element of the supernatural. Can we move on? All right, so here's some of the themes and symbols. We'll start with the symbols. The next one is more the themes. The house itself is a symbol. We talked about that. What does the word house mean besides a structure? A family. There's a well on the property, and that's what drew Colonel Pynchon to it anyway, because he wanted that well. He wanted the fresh water that came from it. And so the well becomes symbolic of something. There's a portrait of the colonel hanging in the house, and that certainly is symbolic of something. There's I guess they call broods, I don't know, a flock of chickens that have been around, regenerating themselves for years on the property. But they get smaller and smaller, sort of symbolic of the family's deterioration, is the deterioration of these chickens. Hypnotism and witchcraft. The story begins with the idea of witchcraft, and you know what hypnotism is? I don't really understand it. To me, it's just a big joke. It's kind of a pseudoscience. Some people, you'd think if it was so great and it could work, then it would be like everybody's like aspirin. Everybody takes one. Everybody does that. You know anything about hypnotism? You've heard of it, right? You somebody it's like almost like an act. Somebody waves something shiny in your face and says you're getting sleepy, and then you go into some trance, and they put some post-hypnotic suggestion, like you will, every time you hear this music, you will not want to smoke a cigarette. I think some people have actually tried to hypnotize them out of nicotine addiction. I don't get it. I don't know. I don't think you can be hypnotized unless you want to. So if you're saying you can't hypnotize me, the answer is you're right. I don't think somebody could. if you're willing to give into it, and if you want to be hypnotized, you probably could be. Also, and this is a great tool, more important than this book, it's the tools of analysis. And one of the things to look for is just opposites or oppositions or contrasts, such as old and new, light and dark, progress versus tradition. These are themes in the book. Do you know what the American dream is? You've heard that expression, right? What is the American dream? Yeah, basically, it's like in America, anybody can become rich. And so that's actually a theme in this book as well. All right, and then the last one here is something called the American claimant, John. Claimant means the American claim, like CLAIM, like that you have a claim of, it's one who asks, that's not the right word, one who access, I don't know what that word's supposed to be, a right or title to an estate. I don't know what that word's supposed to be. A search? There you go. That's probably it. Yeah, and so one of the mysteries of the book, there are a lot of them, but one of the mysteries is that on the property somewhere is supposed to be a document that, if the family can find it, is a deed to hundreds and hundreds of acres of land in Maine, which would be extremely valuable. And so part of the theme of the story is, where is it? Why can't they find it? And they're looking for it. All right, so that's part, and related to that is I got one more list here. The celebration of day. Are you getting this? We're trying to do two things at once. Two things that just doesn't work very well. You don't do either one very well. Trying to do two things at once. Celebrations of daily life. There are several scenes in the book that focus on just everyday stuff, and to me, I don't like that part of the book. Like the first chapter is pretty interesting. Second chapter is just about this woman who's starting a business, and I'm thinking, well, this is disappointing. You know, you got me real excited about this mystery, and all of a sudden, she's starting a job. And but that's part of the story. A lot of celebrations in the book. Power, control, and revenge is clearly a theme. Materialism is a theme. The idea that just having money and the things money can buy can solve your problems. Many a detective story has been solved by finding out that the suspect needed money. If you can find out that somebody needed money really bad, they might be that might be the cause of some crime that they committed. So that's one thing, you follow the money. Let's find out if this guy, you're going to read a book about that, by the way, All the King's Men. That's all he does. He finds that this man, everybody thought was perfect, was in debt at one time, and it caused him to commit a crime because of it. But they didn't know that until they did some hunting. And finally, the danger of inheritances. You will probably, I know your parents want to bequeath to you some money someday. That's what every parent wants to do. They want to, when their time comes and the will is read, that you inherit so many thousands of dollars, or you inherit some property or something. I mean, every parent wants to be able to do that. However, there are dangers in that. It's much better for your character to earn it than to be given it. And so part of the problem with this family is things that they've inherited. We inherit bad things as well as good things. Like if parents are pretty successful financially, you might inherit some of that money someday. But you also inherit who they were, and you will pass your genes, your DNA, and personality on to your children. And that maybe isn't such a great inheritance in some cases. But one of the points of the book is that it's better to earn it than to be given it. Because people who get money tend to waste it, and people that earn it tend to use it wisely. All right, so these are some themes of the book. You need to know what a Gothic novel is, and I have two related definitions. A Gothic novel is a fictitious narrative in prose of which the scene and incidents are very remote from those of ordinary life. That could actually have to do with a lot of things, but it's definitely true of Gothic. The events in a Gothic novel are not ordinary, typical events. But more specifically, here's this definition works. It's a form of novel in which magic, mystery, and chivalry are chief characteristics. Horrors abound. So Edgar Allan Poe is on here, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you could put Bram Stoker's Dracula, and even the poem we did earlier this week, we're going to come back to in a minute, Kubla Khan, is an example of a Gothic story. All right, so this all falls in that category of Gothic novel. I don't know why it's called Gothic. There's a reason, obviously, but the Goths were a tribe in England, not in England, in Europe during the, at the end of the Roman Empire, and I think they sacked Rome at one time, as did other groups, but I'm not sure why it's called Gothic there. I'll have to look that up. Okay. One of the first Gothic novels was set in a medieval castle, hence the term Gothic. I guess that refers to the type of architecture, like the medieval architecture. So the word God refers to that haunted house, the haunted castle type thing. This may be the last one. Let me double check. There might be one more. Nope. This is it. All right, so you have what you need. Read the first 7 chapters by next Wednesday. And there are no questions or anything. That's why it's going to be really important for you to underline writing your book. I have to look at mine. I have to take a look at it. So would you get out the poem Kubla Khan? I don't think we finished it. I'm going to just kind of give you some analysis of it. I think that's important. And then I'm going to finish by giving you a new poem. So we're not gonna reread this, but the poem is Kubla Khan, and remember it's the story, it's not even a story, it's a description of Kubla Khan's city called Xanadu, and I just wanted to review a couple of things about it since this fits the category of Gothic. All right, so look at the questions. Remember the time period of the poem? Elizabeth, you here when we did this? This is number 1.
I said 1300s.
We know that because that's when Kubla Khan lived, but we also know what elements in the poem tell us that it's medieval. Remember any of the elements? Walls, towers, gardens bright, so forth. So that would suggest walls and towers would suggest castles, which is medieval. The poem is described or is organized geographically, spatially. So it starts with Xanadu, which is the civilized area, and it runs down. The river, it describes the river running through and then down to chasms and then to caverns and then a sunless sea. So the trajectory of the poem is down. Those are things that you need to notice. Like, how is this thing organized? Is there any rhyme to it? And yeah, that was one of the explanations. Number 3, we already did that. Number 4, what role does the setting of the play have in the poem? It's the entire poem. There's almost nothing else in the poem. What is the purpose of the poem? We'll have to come back to that. How about number 5? What role does the damsel play in the poem? You know, at the very end, let's take a look at that. It says this, turn the page. It says, a damsel with a dulcimer, which is a stringed instrument you hit with a hammer. They call them hammers. They're like little mallets, like have you ever seen a xylophone, something like that. In a vision once I saw, it was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Could I revive within me her symphony and song? To such a deep delight would win me, with that with music loud and long, I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard them should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair, weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, and he on honeydew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. So the question is, what is her role in the poem? And notice it says he had a vision, right? And he's had something in his head. He saw a vision of this woman, and he heard this song. And it made him want to recreate it. Have you ever created something? Have you ever, even if it was a kid, you drew a picture. Maybe if you're in art, you do that all the time. I was talking to a student yesterday. She's a senior, and she wants to go to a college where she can learn musical composition. She wants to create songs, music. If you're an artist, you know what that's like. If you're a carpenter, if you know what it's like. I think we've all created things before. And where does it start? Where does the thing start? I mean, you have nothing there, but somehow in your head, it starts in your head. You get a vision. I'm calling it a vision. You get an idea, and you want to turn this idea into a song, into a painting, into a sculpture. You got something you want to build on the back of your house. You got this picture in your head. I'd like that additional room. So it all starts with an idea, and you want to create that idea. So this is answer to question number 8. So turn to question number 8. State the central idea or theme of the poem in a single sentence. And it's also question number 4, what's the purpose? I think the purpose is to show the artistic process from idea to reality. So you get this picture in your head, and you want to create it, either in a song or poem, something you create with your hands. All right, so that's the central purpose of the poem. But I would also like to point out some of the contrasts in the poem. And let me give you some of those. These are some things. The poem is filled with contrasts. And this is something to look for when you're reading a poem. First of all, the contrast between civilization and uncivilization. I don't know how to put that. The civilized versus the savage. So this poem has contrast between a civilized place, Xanadu, and the uncivilized places where the ocean, the river is running to the underground sea. That'd be one. Number 2, there's life at the garden. There's fruit, there's trees, and then there's a lifeless ocean. So you have that contrast between life and lifelessness, between violent motion, all that stuff happening underwater, and peaceful motion. Just it says the river meanders through, so it kind of gently travels. You have religious imagery, like sacred river and savage place, holy and enchanted. So you have supernatural versus the natural. They have these supernatural elements versus the beautiful nature. You have war versus pleasure. He wants to build a pleasure dome. And he also hears voices prophesying war. So you have those contrasts. You have the contrast between the secular pleasure dome and the sacred river. So you have a conflict between the sacred and the secular. So that's another thing to look for. You've got to start looking for things that will help you analyze the poem. And so at the very end, his purpose is to show how the creative process works. You get an idea and you want to produce it. And the last question is, what elements of romanticism do you find in the poem? All right, so I'm going to just give this to you just to save us some time. Nature is one. There's a lot of nature in this poem, and that's one thing that romantics like. Two, there's, in a sense, there's a lot of emotion. There's not sad, but he gets excited. He has this emotion of wonder or awe or excitement that when he's thinking about this vision that he has, he wants to put it down in paper, on paper. So there's nature, there's the supernatural. We mentioned that a minute ago. There's nature, but then there's supernature or supernatural. And that's also romantic. And it's not real. This is not possible. It's just kind of bizarre. And so it's the supernatural. This idea of beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair. It seems like some supernatural kind of vision. So natural, nature, supernatural. The elements of emotion in there are also part of this. All right, so as we finish today, I have something I want to give you. If you'll get out your book and turn to page 222. I'm going to give you a sheet and you can pass it back. I'm going to let you do most of this on your own, but
It's 7.
Yeah, it's 7 Gables.
What you're looking for.
sunshine.
There's not a lot of that today.
No, I keep looking. All right, so you're on page 222 of your poetry book. Max, would you start for us 222? And this is in honor of today, which is not a pretty day, but it's supposed to be a great looking weekend starting tomorrow, Thursday. So it's supposed to be really nice. But we're going to start it today. So Max is going to read, Elizabeth's going to read, and Nick is going to read. So there are 3 stanzas. And then I'm going to let you have it. I'll let you add it, rather. You can work with somebody on that. So, Max, would you start for
Season of mist, mellow fruitfulness, close blossom friends, and maturing sun. Inspiring with him how to load and bless, with fruit the vines that round the thatched eaves, to bend with apples the moss cottage trees, and fill all fruit with brightness to the board, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells, with a sweet kernel to set budding more, and still more later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has overbrimmed